Dasha Nekrasova is somebody who often hosts a very popular podcast. She also is somebody who has pursued to some excess a career as an actress and even a director and producer in Hollywood, yet she found herself at the middle of a news story that originated out of Hollywood, has spread throughout the political world because of the repercussions, involving punishments that likely are to be enduring, even permanent, to her career in Hollywood as a result of interviews she conducted on her program Red Scare, which is the podcast that she co-hosts, which has essentially been around since 2017 or so. It has always been a very heterodox sort of show. It's difficult to pigeonhole. I wouldn't even call it a politics show necessarily, more of a cultural commentary show. Though it does certainly have a lot of political guests and talk about political topics, but not quite in the same way political shows do. I've been on that show as a guest on that podcast many times, not for a couple of years, but since its inception. And it really is a kind of its own category of podcast, which is one of the reasons it has become so popular. It's a very kind of idiosyncratic cult following, but a lot of people listen to Red Scare, and they're funded mostly, or exclusively rather, by Patreon. So for those of you who aren't familiar with this podcast, and if you aren't, I suggest you give it a listen. There's really not a lot like it. Here you see the kind of whimsical nature of it, just to make clear that it's not purporting to be Meet the Press or some serious political program where leading Hollywood figures should be so preoccupied with what guests go on to the show. The tagline is "The Ladies Make a Podcast," and there you see a woman with her shirt elevated where it says Red Scare. And this is sort of the whimsical, playful tone and ethos of the show that's reflected in this image. Again, it's very hard to pigeonhole or explain, but suffice to say, it's not really primarily a political show, notwithstanding how many political guests they've had. Now, what they really look to is they try and do interesting cultural commentary things in the culture. And I don't just mean culture in terms of film or art, but also culture meaning politics. All of that composes American culture. And I would say that the only common thread of all their guests are people who, for whatever reason, they personally find interesting. And they've interviewed very controversial people over many years, the way most, say, independent media outlets do. We certainly have had our share of very controversial guests. It's something that if you're actually interested in hearing from people, other than the ones who just are put through the DC swap machine of Sunday news shows and cable programming, you're going to always, of course, talk to fringe people, marginalized people, people very controversial, and oftentimes those are where the most interesting perspectives lie. And they have been the subject, Red Scare has, of a lot of commentary in the mainstream press, especially since they sort of began with a left-wing perception. They kind of grew out of the movement that supported Bernie Sanders, but really their immersion occurred as a result of their criticism as to women of the excesses of the Me Too movement, which they were denouncing almost from the start of the Me Too movement, anticipating where this would go in terms of the abuses. That's what really brought them on the map, got a lot of audience. And already they were obviously somebody whose perspective and agenda wasn't exactly welcome with open arms in mainstream media outlets. So a lot of the attention they had been getting was often negative, but that became even more so as they interviewed a lot of controversial hosts, people like Steve Bannon and Alex Jones and Curtis Yarvin, but lots of people on the left as well. It's just a very eclectic kind of show. And certainly nothing like what happened this week to Dasha in terms of her acting career was ever provoked by any of those other guests. She certainly suffered some in her career as a result of her political views and the hosting of this podcast, but she had a reasonably successful career in film and was able to reconcile them both. Here's the sort of thing that how Red Scare used to be covered in sort of the mainstream liberal press. This is from New York Magazine in October 2018. They're near the start of their show as they began to become much better known, much better listened to, had a lot of explosive growth. There you see the title, and again, this is a very kind of sort of typically liberal New York Magazine. The title was Red Scare Leans Into Nothing, a podcast that offers a critique of feminism and capitalism from deep inside the culture they've spawned. So there you see the two of them. They're often criticized for their kind of ironic posture. Sometimes it's viewed as nihilism. They're very funny. They're both very smart. And I've always thought the show was worth listening to. But this is the kind of media reception that never really knew what quite to do with Red Scare. But it's been around for a long time, based in New York, and it's by all metrics, popular program. Certainly not as big as, say, Joe Rogan's show or in the same universe as other of the top leading podcasts in the country, but it has a very strong cult following, a very sizable audience that has long made it interesting and worth paying attention to. And as I've said, Dasha Nekrasova has been able to do all of that while pursuing a pretty successful acting career, including sort of the crown achievement of her career in Hollywood was that she was a recurring character on the hit HBO show Succession for season 3. I think she appeared in every episode. Wasn't a major character, but certainly the next level. And she's had other types of successes in her acting career as well. All of that has changed. She's now in the subject of a kind of cancellation in Hollywood that a lot of people thought was no longer going to exist once people started becoming aware of the excesses and destruction and how toxic cancel culture in its purest form, which is what this is, and with the election of Donald Trump. But she's undergoing the kind of cancellation that was sort of peak wokeism of 2020. And it pretty clearly seems to have been triggered by one event. Obviously, the other things she said and done that don't exactly embody and align with Hollywood orthodoxy have contributed to it, to brought us to this moment. But the breaking point, sort of like the breaking point of conservatives attacking Tucker Carlson in the Civil War, the MAGA movement, was their decision, like many, many other shows have made, including our show, to interview somebody who is undoubtedly very influential, both in politics and in culture, especially among young people, and that's Nick Fuentes. It was on October 10th when that episode aired. There you see it. This is from their Patreon list of shows, which is where they appear on Patreon. It's how they are funded and supported by their listeners through Patreon. The title of it was Fentanyl OD with Nicholas J. Fuentes. It'll play on the world fentanyl. And there you see a picture of those three of them. That's on the right, Dasha on the left, and Nick Fuentes in between. And I wouldn't really describe this particular interaction as friendly. It wasn't hostile, but it was basically the two of them asking Nick Fuentes questions about what he thinks about certain issues and then pressing him when they thought maybe some of it needed to be elaborated more or overplayed. It was very similar, and I thought, to the Tucker interview, although obviously this was lighter, a little more ironic, because again, they don't purport to be a political show. But it certainly wasn't a show, here's the person who we consider our leader, here's somebody who is speaking the most important truths that are opening. It was just a show of a guest that they find interesting, like every other one they've been doing for a long time. Somebody who wields influence, somebody who has things to say, and they were trying to dig into the roots of what he thinks. And their interview style is very different than most people's, and it does elicit things that you don't normally say. I've had that experience where I've gone on that show and talked about things or talked about it in a way that I don't normally do and didn't expect to, because of the style that's just kind of keeps you disoriented because it's so unfamiliar. It was an interesting episode. Probably not the most interesting Nick Fuentes appearance, but certainly nothing out of the ordinary. They did the interview. It seemed like things were more or less copacetic. And then on November 14th, Variety, which is one of the main industry journals, the main industry magazines in Hollywood, ran this headline, which was this: Gersh, which is a talent agency that represented Dasha for quite a while in trying to get her roles in her career, drops Succession actress Dasha Nekrasova after a podcast with white nationalist Nick Fuentes. So they are clearly linking the two events, not necessarily saying it's the only cause, but clearly implying that there's great causal connection, which of course there is. So she had a guest on her show, interviewed him, questioned him, and for that crime, her own agents, who have a duty to promote her career, sort of like a lawyer or a doctor, somebody who has duty bound to advance your interests, not only terminated her quietly, they ran to the Hollywood press to announce that they were disassociating themselves from her. So you can only imagine the motivations that would lead somebody to do that. Now, when we reached out to Dasha a few days ago about the possibility of coming on our show and talking for the first time, she hasn't given any interviews either in print or video explaining what happened and why. at the time, she really, when I had a brief conversation with her about what happened, she really wasn't certain. She knew that her talent agency her agents had called her to say they're terminating their relationship. She obviously knew it was in the context of Nick Fuentes' interview, but she wasn't really sure. She speculated that there might have been a few stray comments about a film that she was just hired to do. And the producer of that film, as part of this news reporting demonstrates, fired her as well. It wasn't just her agents, but it was this film she was set to begin filming next week. They also, the producer of the film also fired her. And she thought maybe there were, in the announcements of this film and her role in it, a couple of, internet comments. You would think most people who use the internet don't care about internet comments. They know it's not representative of anything, but a lot of people in industries of power are very sensitive to those. If they read one or two, like, why are you hiring someone who's a Nazi or associated with Nazi? That can really affect people's decision making, even just anonymous comments, stray comments. And she thought that that was maybe what generated the pressure. As it turns out, The Hollywood Reporter, which is another significant industry journal in Hollywood, has a very lengthy article today explaining what actually happened, what actually led to her agents and these film producers canceling her. And it is a surprisingly sympathetic article that makes her look like the victim of some of the most extremist and most destructive and toxic forms of cancel culture, and the person responsible look like an unhinged maniac. And we're going to talk to Dasha in just a second. She just learned of this when The Hollywood Reporter reported it as well. So she has some really interesting things to say about this. But basically, here you see the headline, The Long Thorny Path to Dasha Nekrasova's Hollywood Shunning. So she's officially shunned, according to what you could say is the official Journal of Hollywood, which is The Hollywood Reporter. She's now shunned, and it tells the story of exactly how and why. And it's not because extremely powerful people in Hollywood heard the Nick Fuentes interview and then top-down ordered her to be fired. I mean, again, it's a successful podcast, but it's not a podcast that influences millions. Like, who would even care what guests they have on, really? Especially given the guest in question is a guest that has been on so many other shows, including ones with much larger, more political audiences. But what actually happened, it centers around somebody named Jonathan Daniel Brown, who had a sort of acting career in Hollywood when he was a teenager, and has kind of just floated around Hollywood, doesn't really work anymore as an actor, kind of is involved in some producing things. But apparently what he actually does instead is monitors people's opinions who work in Hollywood and try and get them destroyed and fired if they have opinions that he dislikes, especially on Israel. There you see a picture of him. Sometimes pictures really do tell the story. They really are worth 1,000 words, if not more. There you can kind of see him, Jonathan Daniel Brown, the person who engaged in this behavior as described by The Hollywood Reporter. Quote, Jonathan Daniel Brown was not in a laughing mood when he wrote his email to Gersh. That's Dasha's agency. An agency to which he has no formal ties. He had been tracking one of Gersh's clients, Dasha Nekrasova, for some time. For 2 years, Brown kept listening to Red Scare and kept emailing Gersh with warnings that their client was platforming dangerous hate speech. But Brown was not done. Several days earlier, it had been reported that Nekrasova had been cast in Iconoclast, the feature film debuting director, the feature film directing debut of actor Gabriel Basso, who, just as an aside, was the one who played J.D. Vance in the film made on his book. Quote, be careful, he wrote. Dasha just did a podcast with Nick Fuentes. Bad idea to be associated with anyone who is openly pro-Hitler. Oh, wow, the producer of the film responded. Quote, this is the producer of the film. The other producer is Jewish and is friends with her. I don't know her. When news broke that Gersh dropped Nekrasova, Brown texted the Iconoclast producer again. Quote, I hope you find an excellent actress to replace her, Brown wrote. Quote, yes, she is being replaced right now, the producer responded. And it goes into a lot more detail about just what an obsessive campaign this was to destroy Dasha Nekrasova's career in Hollywood. Not because she committed any crimes, not because she's accused of being involved in any scandals of any kind, but simply because this random person who's a fanatical supporter of Israel and a Hollywood liberal dislikes the guest that Red Scare has hosted that she's been speaking to, that she asked questions of. One of the things that I found most notable in the interview that we're about to show you is, and again, I have some familiarity with how eclectic and diverse their guest list is. Sometimes they're not even political. They've interviewed people all the way on the left to all the way on the right and everything in between. Dasha pointed out that the guest that they had on immediately prior to Nick Fuentes, was Thomas and Chatterton Williams, who was earmarked in my conversation with her. We taped just a little bit earlier today. Is about as much of the antithesis of Nick Fuentes as it gets. Somebody who's an utterly, I'll say, banal establishment thinker, writes for The Atlantic, just has every dreary, centrist, predictable view, nothing radical about him in any single conceivable way. Just to illustrate the point that they talk to everybody. They talk to a huge range of people. And this idea that you're no longer allowed to platform people if they have political views deemed in Hollywood to be offensive, even though Nick Fuentes' own platform is infinitely larger than Red Scare's. It's not so much about the specific issue with Dasha Nekrasova and her career. As I said, she has a good career, a good job as a podcaster. She makes a decent living. And I hope you'll consider checking out not only her podcast, but also becoming a subscriber to it through Patreon, because one of the only effective ways to punish this kind of tactic, where you threaten people with career destruction to their livelihood, if they express criticism of a certain issue that's sacred to you, or they speak to people who you've put on the no platform list, is to have the public rise in their defense and make sure that their career and their livelihood aren't destroyed. Before we continue, I want to pause on something that fits directly into the themes we cover on our show. We are living in a moment where powerful institutions continue asking for public trust, even as their actions show very little accountability or foresight. For years, the Federal Reserve told Americans that inflation was temporary and the system was sound, yet the cost of ordinary life keeps rising. Groceries cost more, utilities cost more, housing is increasingly out of reach for many, and Washington keeps spending as if none of this has consequences for real people. Here's what stands out. The individuals and institutions closest to the financial system are preparing for uncertainty. Goldman Sachs is warning of a 10 to 20% market decline, while Morgan Stanley has moved away from the long-standing 60-40 portfolio approach and now recommends that investors hold roughly 20% in gold and silver. That is not a small tweak. It tells you that confidence in policymakers and centralized monetary decisions is weakening. Earlier this year, gold broke above $4,300, not because of speculation, but because real assets do not rely on political promises or carefully crafted press statements. If you have retirement savings, it is reasonable to evaluate options outside a system that has shown it can misjudge fundamental economic realities. Golden Crest Metals has created a clear guide that explains why major banks now say every portfolio should include gold and silver, and how to add them to a retirement account tax and penalty-free in 3 simple steps. They also provide a complimentary portfolio review, and for qualified accounts, they offer free shipping, free secure storage, or a free home safe if you prefer to hold metals at home. And qualified accounts may receive up to $25,000 in free silver. To request the guide and speak with their team, call 888-641-7120 or visit goldencrestmetals.com. Again, that is 888-641-7120, goldencrestmetals.com. If the system is not prepared to protect your future, then the responsibility to protect it falls on you. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.